Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second part of the REST API training course. Looking at the attendees, I can see most of you were in the first section, but if you weren't, my name is Sienna Emery, and I'm joined today by Laura Wu, who will be doing QA for the course. If you're new to GoToWebinars, I won't be paying attention to the raised hands during this, unless if I ask a specific question that requires you to raise your hand, oftentimes for the course. I'll ask students to raise their hands just so I can get feedback if you've completed the exercise or not. The best way to reach out to us is through the chat button. And you can chat out to Laura and I, and we can see your questions there, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a good answer for them. If you are continuing on from the first half of the course, you will have to get a new remote desktop again, and that can be done by going to the FME training course resources and getting a virtual machine here. And the first part of the course will just be talking, so you will have time to get a new virtual machine if you do need one. So through this course, we're just covering basically 2 chapters here. And chapter 8 is very short. And then chapter 9 begins, and that's when we're actually building applications. We do have a large amount of time for the course, so I wouldn't worry about us finishing on time. We definitely will, and then at the end of each day, I'm going to see if we have time to just have a question and answer period or time to assist people if they need extra help with any of these exercises. So please don't be afraid to ask questions. They're always very interesting and can help a lot of people as well, especially if I can give you a good enough answer. And so for today, we're going to noon Pacific time. I'll try to give a 10-minute break after about an hour of work. And yeah, let's begin. Let's get into it. So in this section of the course, we'll be talking about developing with Fme Server and the Fme Server REST API. So moving on to chapter 8.1, and we're going to talk about best practices when building a web application using Fme Server. So the first thing you need to do is think about setting permissions for your Fme Server and your application. So as we learned in the first part of the course, all permissions within Fme Server are granted with a token. And this token can have a lot of permissions, or you can limit the permissions of the token. So you want the token to have as limited permissions as possible for your web application to work. And we do have documentation on this. It refers to users. However, it's the same for tokens. You set permissions in the exact same way. So you can look that up, look it up and see what permissions are best to give your token. We also have web service URLs, and by default, that web service URL will only run the workspace that you're setting it to run. So when you create a web service URL, that token attached to it should only run that workspace. You can also set that token to also have permissions to a resource folder if that workspace needs data from your resource folder as well. The next tip I have is if you're doing the data upload function, which we'll see in exercise 20, not 18, that needs to be fixed. Exercise 20 is when we're doing the data uploads. You'll want to set something called a namespace variable. So the namespace variable is a randomly generated key, and that allows you to set something, and it actually sets the folder where that upload goes to, where that data goes to once you're uploading it. So with that randomly generated key, it makes sure that every time you upload a new resource, it's going to a separate location. And that's done with the get session function. And we'll see that when we go to exercise 20. So just know when you're doing data uploads, you'll want to use the get session function first. And we'll see that later on in the course, and I'll explain it then, and hopefully you can see better when we actually see what that function is. So the third tip is to use web service URLs when needed. So web service URLs are great, particularly for data streaming. So if you'd want to stream data back to the user, that's when you'd want to use a web service URL. They can easily be plugged into a third-party application. So if you have another application that you're using, in this case, we'll be looking at Esri, we can plug web service URLs in there, stream that data directly to a web map that's built by Esri. So they're really powerful and they're a really good tool to use, and they don't take much work to set up. You'll also want to use consistent naming conventions when you're building an application. So an application often isn't just your workspace. You can have many different functions in it. So you might want to have an automation or notification in your web application. And it's very important to name that appropriately. I like adding a prefix if I'm building a web application. So I prefix it with whatever that web application is called, and then whatever it's doing. So if I had an automation that was for a data streaming application, I'd write data streaming and then what the automation is called as my title. And that way it can be bundled up neatly. And if someone needs to see what components are within your web application, they can always go back and look at that later. So we have a large number of demos running on the Fme Server Playground, which we looked at last time. And sometimes it can be kind of challenging to determine exactly what is going on with the demos if you're not used to it. So that's when consistent naming conventions definitely come in handy, especially if you are using a token within your web application. And if you have multiple web applications, consistent naming conventions when using a token is very important. Next idea is to create a project. So projects allow you to bundle multiple resources on Fme Server together and put them into one area. This way you can export your project to another server, and it makes it very easy to transfer. We'll be looking at this later on. And then if you're interested in this, but you're not quite comfortable with JavaScript, CSS, or HTML, there's lots of code resources that you can look at and explore. So I listed a few down here, but there's lots of online resources if you're interested in learning more about this. So I'm moving on to section 8.2, which is hosting web applications. So there's several ways to complete this training and view a web application. For ours, we'll be using a Python command to create a simple HTTP server, but that's just one way to do it. That works if you're doing something locally. However, you can also use Google Apps Scripts to host applications just by following their instructions. That's what I first started doing. Or you can do something more officially, which is you can actually deploy web applications using something like an AWS S3 web server. So what we're doing here is great for testing purposes. However, if you wanted everyone to see your web application, you'd have to host it on pretty much a professional site, such as AWS. So when we're deploying web applications, we take our code and we post that up to GitHub. The reason why we use GitHub is because it has versioning. So we can see as the code changes what happened and who made that edit. Then we use something called deploy. So whenever our code is pushed up to GitHub, it automatically sends that code to the AWS S3 web server, and that happens about once a day. So after we push something up, we wait, and once a day that AWS S3 web server is refreshed, and then our edits go out and then they're live. If you're interested in learning more about this, we do have an article here on exactly how we deploy our web applications. All right, so let's look up exercise 16, and this is how to set up the web directory. These instructions will only work if you're using Python 3+. If you're using Python 2, go back to 8.2 and I have instructions there as well. But if you're using the training machines, these functions should work for you. So first you'll want to open up the command prompt. I already did this so I could make my font size a little bigger. However, if you do need to do that, I often just go search windows and type in command prompt. And then you can select the command prompt to open it up. Once you open the command prompt, you should see something like this. And the first step is to type in CD and then a /. This will take you to our C drive where our data is stored. Then you can copy the next command. So all we're doing is going to our Fme data 2019, into our resources, into the REST API folder. And you can copy that just by going Control-C and then right-click to paste and run the command. Next, we're setting up the HTTP server. So copy the Python command. And right-click again to paste. Next, we're going to hit Enter. And this should start spinning up the web server. So if you see something like this, it means that it's working. And we can test it out by going to this website, localhost 8000. And then navigate to My First App. And if you click on My First App.html, not the start one, but the completed one, we can see what the exercise that we'll be doing in exercise 17. So can I get some hands up to see who has finished this exercise? All right, so there's still a few people that need to finish the exercise, so I'll give a few moments for that. So I'm just waiting for people to complete the first exercise. This exercise does need to be completed whenever you are doing the later exercises. So you have to have your HTTP server up in order to get any functionality from any of the following exercises. So if you were to shut down your command prompt and then try this again later, you'll notice that these exercises won't work properly. This has to be up for anything to work with these exercises. So I'll just give another few moments for people to finish up. Once you have completed this exercise, please raise your hand and let me know that you have finished. If you have any questions, as always, please just chat them out to Laura and I, and we'll be able to help you with this. All right, so once you've completed this exercise, please raise your hand and let me know that you have. And if something isn't working properly for you, please let me know through the chat bar. All right, so I think we are ready to move on. If you still have not completed that last exercise, please chat out to us and let us know. Laura should be able to assist you. So we're going to need to take a detour and do something we've done previously if you've taken the first part of this course. We actually need to remake the token that we made previously because nothing was saved on the previous Fme training machine that you did have. We'll have to make a token again in order for these next exercises to work. So we're actually going to go up to chapter 1 and do exercise 1 again. So this is chapter 1, exercise 1. Here we are creating a token. So the first step is to go to your Fme server. So we can go localhost /Fme server. And then we can log in to our Fme server here. And we are using the credentials admin and admin. Both the username and the password are lowercase. So I'm logging into my Fme server. Next, we're going to go to the token management page. So if I find the user settings icon, I can select it. And this is in the top right-hand corner. I'm finding the user settings. I'm selecting it, and then I can select Manage Tokens. Next, we can create a new API token just by clicking the New button here. The token name should be REST API Training Course. The description is token to be used during the REST API training course. Our expiration date, I would choose something like Saturday. No, Saturday is June the 1st because our training machines will automatically disable Friday. So if we choose Saturday, we know the token will be valid for the full time we have the training machines. If you don't set this, I believe it automatically resets in something like 24 hours. So it's good to set the token to something longer. So the token will expire in 4 days, and we want it to be enabled. I have all permissions turned off, but if you are developing a web application and something isn't working and you're receiving something like a 400 error, whether that's 404 or 401, you might want to look at this and switch it to all permissions briefly, just to test if it's the token's problems. Maybe you didn't grant the right permission when developing. If you turn on all permissions, you'll have all permissions, and then you can see if it's the token's fault. Maybe you don't have the right permissions granted. And when you turn it off, it'll go back to whatever you had it set as before. So that's very handy. It's just a quick test. If something isn't working properly for you, whether it's today or in the future when you're developing, quickly switch all permissions to on and test it out. All right, so now we'll have to assign our permissions. We're assigning one token throughout this whole course because I thought it would be redundant to have you create a new token every time you wanted to create a web application. However, if you do go into production with this, it is best to test that out. To create a new token every time you want to create a web application, it's the most secure way to go. All right, so under automations, we'll want to have permissions to create an automation. Under dashboards, we'll want to access the dashboards page. Under engines and licensing, we'll want to manage. Under jobs, we'll want to manage them as well. Projects, we'll want to create projects. In repositories, we'll want to create repositories. In the repositories section, there is a down arrow, and that lets you select individual repositories. So we'll want to click the download. And then for permissions, we'll want to download, read, and run. And we don't want the dashboards, we want the samples. Next, under resources, we'll want to create a resource. With the resources again, we can click the down arrow and select the individual resources that we'd like to have access to. So we can, under data, we want to access list, write, upload, and remove this. Under temp, we would like the same. We would like advanced permissions under Run Workspace. And we'd like to access the Workspace viewer. So I'm just going to go over that again, make sure everyone has the same permissions. So under automations, we are creating. Dashboards, we'd like to access the dashboards. Under engines and licensing, we'd like to manage. We'd also like to manage jobs. We want to be able to create projects, create repositories, and for the individual repositories under samples, we'd like to download, read, and run. Under resources, we'd also like to create resources. And then under data, we'd like full access to our data resource and full access to our temp resource. From here, under Run Workspace, we'd like the Advanced setting. And under the Workspace Viewer, we'd like to access it. So these permissions are important. They're a little overkill for what we're doing in the second half in the course. You could definitely do without a lot of these permissions. However, I wanted to create one token for the whole course in case anyone wanted to run through this course in one day. You can click OK to create your new token. From here, you'll see that your token has been created. You can copy it here or you can download it. It's very important. If you haven't taken the first part of this course, please download your token. Otherwise, you will not have access to it. You have to save it externally outside Fme Server because it will not be saved anywhere within the UI for Fme Server. So please download the token. You can double click on it and save it to your desktop. And we'll be using this token a lot throughout this course, so it's very important to have it set up properly. All right, so I'm just going to give everyone a few moments to set that up again. All the screenshots are listed here. And to get the option to download, first you have to create your token. And then you should see a download button appear after you've clicked OK to create the new token. And the OK button's at the very bottom of the page when you're assigning permissions. All right, can I see raised hands for whoever has completed this exercise? So it looks like most people have completed it. I'll just give another minute or so just to allow anyone who needs help to ask. So unfortunately, if you don't download it the first time, there's no way to access it again. So the best bet would just be to create a new token. After you exit out of this page, you won't be able to see this token again. I'll just give another minute or so for people to wrap up exercise 1. All right, so let's go on to chapter 9. So we just went from chapter 1 and now we'll go to chapter 9, which is building custom web applications. So let's take a look at 9.1. So 9.1, we will be creating what you see here, which is on the right. This exercise is directly from the Fme Server Playground. So you can see it here as well. The Fme Server Playground is a great place to go if you just want to have access to free code to use for any kind of application. Along with having the code, they also tell you what functions they're using. So it makes it very handy. In the course, we take these functions and we expand on them a little. And then I also walk you through exactly what everything in this code is doing. So it's great if you don't have a lot of experience with JavaScript, but you want to get into building the applications. So Fme Server has a JavaScript API that allow users to access their Fme server when building a web application. So in the first part of the course, we looked at the REST API. Now we're looking at our JavaScript API, which is really just a JavaScript library full of functions that call the REST API. So you don't need to know how to turn anything we did in REST to JavaScript. That's all done for you. You can just plug and play these functions in different ways to use their functionality. So in this case, we're creating a dynamically generated form. We have a repository and a workspace, and we're going to get the workspace parameters to run this workspace. So let's say I wanted to change from Austin Downloads to Austin Apartments here. This is another workspace that we have with the samples. You'll see that my form has changed. That's because the Austin Apartments doesn't have any published parameters. So the first thing we need to do to get this to work is use the get workspace parameters function. And that in turn goes to the generate form items. So first we're getting the workspace parameters. So Austin Apartments has no parameters, so it's not going to generate anything. And then we're using generate form items to automatically generate a form for us to use. Next, we're going to run data download, and that's where we see the download results button. So I'm just going to refresh this page and go through that all together. So the first step is to get the workspace parameters. So we have the repository and the workspace set, and then generate a form with them. The user can fill out this form however they like. Then when they click Run Data Download, that job is then submitted to the Fme server. JSON is streamed back to our web application, and in that JSON we have URL with a download link. Then the user can click the download link and automatically download the data that they requested. So let's look at the actual code for that in exercise 17. So we'll finish exercise 17 and then I'll give everyone an ACE break. If you don't finish exercise 17 when I do, please feel free to take that time and keep working on it, and we'll be able to assist you throughout all the steps. So let's start. So in this exercise again, we'll be creating a form that will get information from the workspace, get the published parameters, generate a form with those published parameters, and then the user can click the link to download the data. To do this exercise, we still have to have our command prompt up and running, so don't close that down entirely, just minimize it. All right, so let's go to my first app start.html. To do that, we'll want to go to our Fme Data 2019 folder. It is within the Quick Access link. So under Quick Access, we can click Fme Data 2019. From here, we can click Resources, REST API, My First App, and My First App Start. So that would be the full link, C drive, FME data 2019, resources, REST API, my first app, and we have my first app start here. Now I'm going to right click on my first app and edit this with Notepad++. All right, so everyone should have my first app start.html open. If you go through this exercise, you'll see that there's a lot of locations where we have lines commented out. And these lines are what we need to fix in order to get this application to work. All right, so in the head section, that's denoted by head here, we have our very first comment, which is to connect to our JavaScript API. If you are using any Fme Server JavaScript within a web application, you will need to have this link available for it to use. And this link can be found down here. So we need to delete out this comment. Which is the source for the JavaScript API. And then copy it in. So you'll see here that it is within quotations, and that's what we'd like. So source equals, and then have the JavaScript API within quotations. You can click on the JavaScript API and look through the functions yourself if you are curious. All the functions that we are using are within here. So that was step 2. Now I'm going to go down to step 3, which is to scroll down to line 21. And I can see here I have my example form. So the form is donated by the form tag, which you can see here, or it's here in the manual. And we have set the ID to example form. If you're using JavaScript and you want to refer to something later, you'll have to use an ID to denote it. Oh, and the link for the JavaScript API, it's here, it's hyperlinked, Fme Server JavaScript API, or this is where I found the link to paste in step 2. All right, so in this step, we're just going to change the value to samples in Austin download. So the value is what will appear in the form automatically. So on line 24, we can see the value is currently repository name. We need to delete repository name there. This is on line 24. And replace that with samples. Next, we need to do the same with the workspace name. This is on line 28. Copy Austin download and replace workspace name. So line 27 and 28 should look like that. Next, we'll want to change the input type. So currently we have a type here, and our input type will be a button. So delete input type and write button. So now we have the form ready to go. It will automatically say samples in Austin download, and then we'll have a button that says generate full form. And on click, it's going to set off the JavaScript function process form. So you can go ahead and save and move on to step 4. In step 4, we have something called an output form. So this is a form that will be created later on with the published parameters from whatever workspace that the user chooses. The form ID will be output form, and that's what we're referring it to in our JavaScript. So we'll have to change it to that. So we're deleting form ID here. And this is on line 37, and we're replacing it with output form. So now we're all done with the HTML. That's all we need to do is create those 2 forms. Now we can move on to the JavaScript. So I'm on step 5, line 39. This is where things can get a little confusing because you may need to use different URLs depending on what you're doing. So for most of the training, using HTTP Fme training is okay. You could also use HTTP localhost. However, if you're using functionality that requires Esri, you'll either need to use your publicly available IP address or a publicly available DNS. So you'll either want to use a publicly available host name or IP address. All of our training machines are set up with a publicly available IP address. So later on, that's what we'll be using is a publicly available IP address when we're using something like Google Maps or Esri that requires something to be publicly available for Esri or Google Maps to understand our code. But for the most part, using Fme training in this server section will be okay. So we want to delete the demo's URL and copy and paste Fme training into there. If you're not on a training machine, you'll want to use your own host name. And then we'll want to create a token as we won't want to create, we'll want to copy and paste our token in there as well. So I have my token created in exercise 1. I'm going to copy that and paste my token in. And then I'll save that again. So your server should be HTTP FME training, and then the token, you can paste that in once you've created it. Next, we'll want to update the process form function, and this is located on line 47. So process form requires three different things. It requires the repository, the get workspace parameters requires three different parameters. You'll need the repository, the workspace, and a callback. A callback is used in JavaScript when you have something produced in the first function that you'll need to use in a later function. In our case, Fme Server is returning JSON to us, and we'll want to place that into a new function later on. So we're using get workspace parameters, and then we're sending that JSON directly to generate form later on. To get the repository and workspace name, we'll have to type in the ID that we assigned above. So if you look at the screenshot just below here, we can see we entitled the repository ID as repository name, and then the workspace ID as workspace name. We'll have to change that on line 48 and 49 of our code. So we need to find the repository ID and update it there. And notice we're using get element by ID. So we're getting this element by the ID that we called it earlier on in our workspace, which you can see on line 24. So for the repository ID, it will be called repository name. And it should automatically populate when you start writing repository. So that's repository dash name. Then under workspace, we'll need the workspace ID, and that'll be workspace dash name. Every time I ask you to delete or remove something, what it should look like completed will be directly below within a screenshot. So if it's in a screenshot, that's what your workspace or that's what your script should look like. So we can see here we have bar repository, document get element by ID, repository name, dot value, so we're getting the value of the repository name. And the next line is pretty much exactly the same, but with the workspace, and we're getting the value of the workspace name. We're using the repository and the workspace to get the workspace's publish parameters. And that JSON will be sent to generate form, which will generate a nice form for us to use, so the user can enter in whatever publish parameters they would like. All right, let's move on to step 7. Step 7 is located on line 55. Here we have the generate form function. You can see we're using the JSON created in the previous function. So generate form is the callback function for the previous function. So it takes the JSON return from Fme Server and then uses it to create this form. There's 3 different parameters, and one is optional for generate form. So we just need the ID, which is the form container to hold the elements in. And we set that up previously with the output form. And then the JSON, which is the JSON object containing the form data from the getWorkspace function. So on line 58, we can see we have no parameters filled in. So we'll want to fill in our parameters. So for the ID of the form to place the elements in, that will be our output form. And then you'll need a comma and then write JSON, because that's the data that's coming back from the getWorkspace Parameters function, which we see directly above. So moving on to step 8, now in the code we're creating a button, and this button will be used to activate the next function to send the job to Fme Server. So once the user has decided what parameters they'd like to set, they need something to click to say that they're all done setting their values and that they'd like to send the job off to Fme Server. So we need to modify our code here to run the data download button. So under submit button, we're going to give it the type of button. So that's the type of input it will be. So on line 64, I'm writing in button. Next, for the value, it's going to be run data download. So the value is just what the button will say. So it has to be something descriptive enough that the user will understand it. All right, so let's go to step 9, which is the run data download function. There is a show results function here, but we're just going to ignore that for now and go to line 82, which is the run data download. All right, so run data download is going to get the repository that the user specified and also get the workspace that the user specified and get what the user filled out in the output form. The output form is what contains the published parameters. Then we also have an empty string here for the parameters to go in, because we'll have to use the parameters to run our workspace later on. To get our parameters, we'll have to loop through them. So we're creating a for loop here. So its function is to run through that output form until there's no parameters left. And then they'll have to decide what the element type is and what the user filled in and put that into parameters that Fme Server can understand. So in the next exercise or the next step, we'll have to decide what these element types are. So first we're going to save this code. And then go to populate forms. Oh, I must have missed something. So this can happen. Even if you have a simple syntax error, sometimes your entire page will not load. If this happens to you, right-click on the page and click Inspect. You should see an error here in the console, but I'm not seeing an error. So something else must be going on. I'm going to go back and see if my original one is working. And because my original one is working, I know it's not something with the web server I set up. So I'm going to backtrack quickly and figure out why this isn't going well for me. Oh, all right, I was missing a close bracket up there. Hopefully that was a mistake I just made and not something that was in the script originally, but that's something to check out. So on line 11, we need to close this script tag. So just make sure on your script that that is closed, and then it should run fine. So now saving it and then go back to populate form, my first app start. So now I'm back on step 10. Right click and selecting Inspect. Once you inspect this, we'll see the developer tools pop up. So that's what I was looking at to try to troubleshoot what was going on with my previous workspace. I can click Generate Full Form here, and that will generate my elements from the Austin download. So it's generating the different published parameters. I can right click and select Inspect and see the input type that I'm producing. So if I right click on the layers to download, I can see that I'm producing an input type of a checkbox there. I can also inspect other elements on my page to see what I'm producing. Or if you want, you can click this button up here. So at the very top left, or if you go Control-Shift-C, you can also hover over and see your different inputs. So this is Control-Shift-C. You can see exactly what you're inputting. So I have a checkbox, I have a select, and then I have an input up here. So we'll fill this out in step 11. So go back down to line 88. And fill in the different element types. So on line 91, it will be a select. On line 94, we're switching this to a checkbox. And then all other inputs are treated the same. So if an element is the type select, it will look up the selected index and get the value from that to add to our parameter string. If it's an element that's checked, the parameter plus the element value and the element name will be added to our parameter string. So we're looping through, and every time we have an element that's selected or checked or simply inputted, we'll have the element name equals element value and the and sign or the ampersand at the end. So for every parameter, it's going to go through, check what it is, find the element name, add an equal sign, and then find the element value, and then add an ampersand on the end. When it reaches the last published parameter, we'll have an additional ampersand on the end. So that's why we're using this params substring, and we're minusing the params length from there. So we don't want to finish off with an ampersand, so we're just removing the ampersand using this right here. And then we can run the data download with the repository, the workspace, the parameters, and show results. So show results is the callback, and this is where the JSON is produced. So if we scroll up and we go to show results, this starts on line 70. The first thing we have in here is a console log or a console dir that will show us the JSON that is produced from the run data downloads function. So save the workspace again, or save the script again, and then go back here. If you are simply just refreshing the page you had open, when you refresh, hit the shift button when you're clicking reload the page, and it should pull anything we have. Sometimes the data gets cached, so it's not automatically updated. So if you hit shift and then reload the page, it will fully reload the page. So next I'm going to click the generate a form function. And I'm going to right click and inspect. When I run data download, nothing will happen, but something should appear up here. Let's try that again. Perfect. Sometimes I get a little impatient. So this data download, or this download result, will not have anything in it because we have not set it up properly yet. But in your console, you should be able to see what is returned from your Fme server. So we have a service response and we have a URL here. So you should see something like this. We can see inside the service response, we have our URL, and that URL contains the data that the user will then download. So go back, and on line 77, we can see we have the download and the URL. Copy and paste the JSON service.url. Save it, and then we can test this again. And now it should fully work. So I don't need the console open anymore, so I can hit Shift, reload the page. I can select whatever layers I want to download, and then click Run Data Download. Now I'll just have to wait a few moments for my server to respond with the URL. Some of these layers do take longer than others to load. But I should see download results here, and if I hover over it, I can see my link appear, and that does look correct. So if I click Download Results, I should get the shapefiles I was expecting. So that brings us to the end of, this was exercise 17, I believe. Yes, exercise 17. We use the Fme REST API JavaScript to create an application, and we use the get workspace parameters, generate form items, and run data download functions. If anything happened with your application, please let us know. I think this would be a perfect time to take a break. Let's say 15 minutes here, since we went a little over time, so we probably won't get another long break soon. So let's take a 15-minute break. We're going to take a little detour and talk about some troubleshooting steps now. So there are some common issues that do come up within this course. So I just wanted to talk about them and show you what they look like. So if you're going throughout this course and you are noticing these things do occur for you, just some things you might want to check out. So one thing is it's very easy to make a syntax error, and I'll show you what that looks like and how you can hopefully figure out exactly what's going on. So I'm just going to open up my application here. Now, I think by removing this semicolon, so I had a semicolon there. If I delete it, I should get an error. Let's test that out. Oh, nope, that works. I should have gotten an error there because that is improper syntax. Oh, yeah. Let's see, there's another way I can cause a syntax error to occur. Let's see if I just have a typo there. can it pick it up? So there. If you do something like that, have a typo, you should be able to see around where the typo is occurring and then look at it again. So there I deleted, instead of output, I have outp on line 60, and it's showing up on line 67 here. But I know to look for it in that area to see what might be going wrong. We also have our HTTP server up. So this is using the Python command, and it's creating a simple web server. So it's opening up port 8000, which it just does automatically. So you might have a port 8000 closed for one reason or another, but that's what it does automatically. If you look up the documentation on the Python command, you can see how to set it to a different port if port 8000 does not work for you. But it's just creating a simple web server. So it's connecting us to the internet to be able to use these functions and communicate with Fme Server. If you open up your document, without going through this URL, the localhost 8000, if you open it up just like this, it has no functionality because it's not connecting to the server. And it's not connecting to the internet at all. You can see the HTML works fine, but anything relating to JavaScript will not be okay. And the next thing you can look at is a token permission. So if I go back and let's say my token is invalid, I'm deleting a number off the end of my token. I'm going back here and I can refresh. Sorry, now it's taking a long time for my page to load. But if I see that my token is invalid, I can expect a 400 error. And I should see that in my console log. I don't know why it's being so slow now. No. I must have clicked on something in my Python. Now this should work. It's funny when you have to troubleshoot your troubleshooting session. I'm actually just going to restart these commands. There we go. So it shouldn't be able to access my server. And if I go to the errors here, I should see a 401 error. If I Google what a 401 error is, it can tell me that I'm unauthorized. So because my token is incorrect, I should see an unauthorized error. So to find that, you can just look on the console and then click and see what's going on. Unfortunately, it's not very descriptive, but given that it's a 401 error, it gives me some place to go. Everything is also very case sensitive, and that can result in a 401 error as well. So if I just change this to lowercase samples, I should get an error that I don't have access to the samples repository. You can see the full error down there. So those are a few things that you can look at. I find what's most common for me, at least, is either it's an issue with my token permissions. So I didn't give the token the correct permissions, and I can correct that by going to my token and then selecting all permissions and testing that out. Or it's simply just a syntax error. I didn't type in something correctly. I missed a semicolon somewhere, and that can totally offset your whole web application. How you can fix that is going to the web application. If you right-click and select Inspect, the errors should give you a good idea of what's going on. So that's always the first step, is to look at what's going on. If it's a type of error, Google what that type of error is. So this is a 403, so it's different from 401. Look at the type of error, think about, can that relate to Fme Server somehow? If it is something like a syntax error, most times it will tell you what line the error is occurring on. So you can go directly to that line and figure it out. I had one time where I typed in the repository wrong, and the repository was hard-coded in, and it told me that that was incorrect, and I could go to that line and figure it out that way. But yes, the developer tools are your friends. If the developer tools are giving you a 404 or a 401 error, try the permissions and make sure that the repository that you are trying to access is something that your token has access to. So now we have lots of time for the course. So I wanted to do something a little different and start exercise 18. But instead of doing the full exercise 18 in this step, I think today we're going to create the workspace for exercise 18. And then tomorrow we'll come back and we'll create the web interface for exercise 18. So let's talk about what exercise 18 is. We are integrating an external mapping tool with the Fme Server JavaScript API. So what this will look like is we have the JavaScript, we have the mapping tool open. So this is Esri Maps. We will be able to select an area and get information within that area. In this case, we're using the Drive BC API. So we're using another API within Fme Workbench to pull current data and show us what traffic accidents are occurring within that area. So go to 9.4, exercise 18. Instead of starting on step 1, let's scroll down. and start on step 11, and we'll complete steps 1 to 10 tomorrow. So on Create a Workspace, step 11, exercise 18. So here we're going to open up Fme Workbench. So I just did that by clicking down by my Windows panel, but you can also find Fme Workbench under Most Used. All right, and now we're going to create a new workspace. So again, we're under exercise 18, step 11. We're going to create a workspace, which will get data from the Drive BC API. And then tomorrow we'll be creating a web application to use this data and to get coordinates. We're getting coordinates from the web application and we're putting it into our workspace. So under our blank workspace, we're going to add a creator. So simply type in creator and select the creator. And I'm going to zoom in. Next, we're going to add a geometry replacer. So when a user is selecting an area on the web map that's given to them, they're actually selecting what coordinates they'd like to send to our workspace. So we're using a geometry replacer to take in those coordinates and then create geometry out of them within our workspace. So after you've added the geometry replacer, attach it to the creator. And open up the cogwheel on the geometry replacer. Next, the web application will be creating well-known text. So we'll want to change the geometry encoding to well-known text. And it will be under OGC well-known text. The geometry source will be coming from a published parameter. So as the user is selecting the coordinates, it's going to go to a published parameter. So we have to create that published parameter in our workspace. To do that, under geometry source, click the down arrow to the right, go to user parameters, and create a published parameter. Or create a user parameter. The name will be under geom, and that's how we'll refer to it in the web application. It should be published and it should not be optional. The prompt will be area of interest. And you can copy and paste the default value for the polygon. And then click OK. So now we can see we have a user parameter for the geometry source. Remove attribute should be set to no. And then the precision can be set to 64-bit, and then click OK. Next, we can add an HTTP caller. Oh, perfect. And I actually, while my workspace was loading, I realized I missed a step. We need to add a coordinate system setter. So add a coordinate system setter. To set the coordinate system, because if it's coming in as well-known text, there's no way of Fme to know exactly what coordinate system it is in. So we're going to set this to LL84. And select OK. Now I'm going to save, actually, I'm just going to keep going for now. Next, we have an HTTP caller. The HTTP caller is attached to the creator. So we're starting off with two streams. On one side, we're getting the coordinates from what the web application specified it to be. And then we're using the HTTP caller to find all the results of traffic issues going on in BC. So with the HTTP caller, we can open up the cogwheel. The method will be get because we're getting information. And we're going to copy and paste the request URL. So this request URL is from the Drive BC API. The Drive BC API is something that's publicly available, so no authentication is needed. We're producing JSON here and we're finding all active instances. And now I'm going to click OK. Here we can test our workspace and see what is produced. So now I'm going to save the workspace just by clicking Save up here. And this should be saved in Fme Data 2019. Resources, REST API, My Second App, and then Fme. And this should be called webapp.bc.roads.fmw. And then click Save. Now we should be able to run. You can click the down arrow by the Run button to make sure feature caching is enabled, and click Run. All right, so we can see the JSON that's produced from the HTTP caller. If we click the magnifying glass, we can see what's below, and then click the ellipsis and then click the word wrap. So this has been printed out nicer so we can see exactly what's going on. It can get kind of squishy within the visual preview window. However, if you are doing something like this, it might be worth it to actually copy all of this out and then paste it in a JSON formatter, and it will give you pretty prints back. You can see exactly what features we have to work with. So we can see when it's active, when it's been created. We can see the ID and the URL if we need more information. And that's all under events. And then we also have geography as well. So we can see we have the type of geography it is and then the coordinates. And this is in GeoJSON. So first, let's add a Json fragmenter. The Json fragmenter should be attached to the HTTP caller. And then click the cogwheel to open up the parameters. The input source will be the JSON attribute. And then under JSON attribute, we're going to specify that it's the response body. Under JSON query, we can copy this query. So we're looking under events and we're interested in everything under events. Next, we can choose to flatten out the query into attributes. And then click the ellipsis under attributes to expose. And here we can write status, headline, description, created, and updated. So these are the attributes that we're going to expose, and it's going to create new attributes. And then we can click OK. Next, we can add the JSON fragmenter. So we're adding another one in. And this time we're looking for the geography. So same thing, attribute, looking under the response body. And we're looking for geography. And then click OK. Now we're going to add another geometry replacer and attach it to the second JSON fragmenter. So the geometry replacer will take all of the geometry from the GeoJSON and then make features out of them. So it's a great transformer to use if you have a large string of GeoJSON and you want geometry from it. This is definitely the transformer to use. So under geometry encoding, we can select GeoJSON. Under geometry source, we can select the response body, and then remove attributes is set to yes. Now again, we'll want to use the coordinate system setter. And attach the coordinate system setter to the geometry replacer. Open that up and set it to LLWGS84. And then click OK. Now we're going to add a clipper transformer. So the defaults are okay to accept with a clipper. We don't need to change anything in here. So the clipper will be the top section I created. So this is all coming from the web application. And the clip E is all the information we're getting from the Drive BC API. So if you've been following along and having this on the top and this on the bottom, it will fall in line properly. Now let's save again and run this workspace. If we click the features that are inside, we should see the geometry view come up. And we can add a background map. To do this, you can right-click, find background map, and then switch to new background map. We have our map list. By default, it's Stamen maps, and that's fine. We can look at what different Stamen maps we have. And select the terrain. And then save. We should have a background map loaded shortly here. So this is the window that we're looking at. Good thing we just saved. I'm just going to quickly reopen my workspace there. And show you what we should see. So if I now go to run this again, this might be better. And I'm looking inside, so I'm looking all the places within the well-known text string that I selected. I'm turning on my background map, which should be loaded shortly. And I can adjust this panel to show you the areas that I see. So when I select the different areas, they should light up and show you exactly what's going on. So we don't have any traffic incidents within the area we selected, but we do have a lot of construction along Highway 1. All right. So next we're going to add a no features tester. The reason why we have to add this is if we had no incidents within the inside of the clipper, nothing would happen on the workbench, or nothing would happen in the web application. So the user might select an area and they just won't receive anything back because the workbench will complete successfully. It found nothing within that area and then it'll just stop. The workbench is completed without anything being written out and the user will get quite confused. So now we're adding a no features tester. So click on the canvas and type in no features. And you'll see that it's actually an Fme hub transformer. We can click on it just like we click on a normal transformer, but it will download as a custom transformer for us. So on the inside, we should attach the no features tester. Because if there's no features inside, we'll want to return a message to the user so they're not concerned. Next, we want to add a date time converter. The date time converter should be attached to the output port. And click the cogwheel here to open that up. So for the features, we're looking for updated and created. And then select OK. The input format, Fme can detect it, but we're going to set the output format as exif date time. We're not going to repair any overflows and we're not going to pass through any nulls, empties, or missings. And then select OK. Next, we're going to add the HTML report generator and create an HTML report we can return back to the user. So attached to the output, we have the HTML report generator. And we can open that up. The page title should be Drive BC API. And then we have custom HTML. If you click down, we should be able to enter the custom HTML. And we're going to have a header that says Drive BC road and weather conditions. Next, we're going to add a map. So we can add an Esri Leaflet Map here. The label attribute will be the description. So this is the description on the instance that's occurred. And we can select the color. In the manual, I put 252, 31, 28, but essentially you can select any color that you like. I just picked red so it would stand out. And then we can have a base map here, and this is just the street base map. Next, we're also going to create a table. The table style is going to be condensed. And then we can create a table with our attributes. So the first column content will be status. And then the column name will also be status. Then created. And the column name will be created. Updated. Then the column name will be updated. Description. The column name will be description. Headline, and then the column name will also be headline. So we should have the custom HTML, an Esri map, and then a table as well with all these columns filled in, and then click OK. Next, we're going to add another HTML report generator and attach that to no input. So if we get no input, we still want to return something to the user. So the page title will still be Drive BC API. Then we're going to have a header. And under text, we can just write there are no incidents in the area you selected. And then select OK. Next, we can have an HTML writer. Click OK. And we can attach both our report generators to that HTML writer. Click Save and run the workspace. Here we can specify the destination HTML file. We can go to Fme Data 2019, Fme Data 2018 output, training, and then under file name, just write Drive BC API. Click Save and run. So we can see because we had stuff produced, we created the HTML report. Click on the writer and open it up. Double click here, and this is what we'll have returned. So the user will be able to see incidents that have occurred within their area. Now we can save this one last time and upload it to server. So you can go File, Publish to Fme Server, and create a new web connection. Under connection name, we'll want to specify REST API. The URL will be under localhost. The user is an admin, all lowercase, and the password will be admin as well. Click Authenticate, and then click Next. Next, we'll have to create a new repository. So click New, and the repository should be REST Training. The workspace should be saved under webapp.bc.roads.fmw. We have no files to upload, so we can click Next. And we need to register it under the data download service. So once the user fills out the parameters or they select the area, we want to give them an HTML that they can download and open and see any traffic instance within their area. So we'll use this data download service. And under properties, we can click edit. And we can see that our writer is included in the data download service. Now we can click publish. And this should be published up to our server. If you get that error that Workbench stopped working once you hit publish, that is okay. It should publish successfully. The last thing that we're going to do today is just update our token. So previously we created a token, but every single time you create a new repository, you'll have to update the token's permission as well. So go to localhost Fme server, click on the user settings, and then click Manage Tokens. We'll see our REST API token that we created earlier. So there's two things we have to fix here. The first is when we uploaded the workspace, we created a new repository. By default, the token will not have permissions to that repository, so we need to give it permissions. So find repositories, click the down arrow, and give the token permission to download, read, and run the workspace. Next, we need to give the token permission to more services as well. So under Services, click the down arrow And we can see by default, the token will only have permission to the data upload service. We need to change that. So instead, we'll have download, data streaming, and job submitter. This will allow us to run the data download and have it work successfully with our token. Now click OK. All right, so we have lots of time in this course, and I feel like if I start doing the web application stuff, it might be a little rushed. And we have so much time in the course, it makes sense to end the exercises here for today. We'll come back tomorrow, and we'll start from step 1 to step 10, and we'll make the web interface to make the map part work. So a user will have a map shown to them, they'll select an area, and those coordinates will be sent to the workspace we just created. If you have any questions, please let me know. If anything didn't work for you with the last workspace, we can surely assist you with that. If you're still having troubles with exercise 17 we went through today, please let me know. Or if you have any questions, I can help out with that as well. So Laura and I will stick around, but if you don't have any questions and you feel comfortable with the material, feel free to leave, and then I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.